So this tutorial was inspired by this video, Fake Snow Scene in After Effects, by this guy here. I would highly recommend checking out his stuff if you are familiar with After Effects. But I thought, let me try this in Blender. So that's what I'm about to show you. Welcome back to Blender Frenzy. I am Justin, and you do not see my bubble head today because I'm not using one. I'm a bit tired, and also it's just a hassle trying to get that up. And some of you don't like seeing that bubble head, so yay for no bubblehead today. But today we're going to look at how to create snow if you don't have any snow. So if you want a white Christmas for Christmas and you don't have any snow, this is how you can make it yourself. So first, go ahead and import your footage. I'm assuming you've taken footage, so let's go to our video editing and then hover your mouse over here, Shift A, up. By the way, you can see my little shortcut keys over here if you want to look down here. Okay, so Shift A, add in our movie, navigate to your footage and import your footage. Let's bring this up a little bit more here. I'm just going to scrub through here, find the part of the footage that I want. We'll do actually, I think 395 is going to be good for that. Yeah, I'm just going to go all the way to the end here and then cut and delete the rest of this footage so we just have this in our view. I'm going to mute our audio because we don't need that right now, just H to hide that. Go back to the beginning here. So what I'm going to do is render out an image sequence so that it's smoother for what we're about to do. So I'm going to come up here to our output properties and make sure everything is the same. And if you click on your video footage and then right click, go to movie strip, you can set the render size if it's not already set. It should set everything here like the original footage was if it's the first movie that you added. So everything is good here. I want to go to my output and do a double /, which means that's going to be output in the same folder that my blend file is in. And then I'm going to create a new folder called IMSQ for image sequence. You can name it whatever you want. Another /. I'm just going to type in footage / another footage, and then underscore enter. And this is inside our blend file folder. We have another folder called image sequence, and then we have another folder called footage. And then inside that folder, we have a file called footage underscore. And the reason we have an underscore here is to separate the frames that are going to be added here. I'm going to uncheck overwrite for now and then leave file extensions checked. And then for the format, I'm actually going to change this to JPEG and 100% here. Okay, don't forget to save it before you render, so in case it crashes, and then Control F12 to render out that image sequence. Okay, so let's go to rendering and you can see what's happening here. If we pull this up like this, and you can see this, you can adjust this here too. It's probably out of sync, but come up here, make sure if you don't see anything, make sure your render result is selected up here. And so we're just going to wait for this to finish out rendering out and we'll be back. Okay, it's finished. So let's go back over to our video editing and then I'm going to hide our original movie and then add in an image sequence, navigate to your footage folder, make sure it starts at 1 and counts up sequentially, and then select all of them, add image strip, move your footage up, and now we can play our footage or scrub through our footage. And that actually scrubs through nice and easy, a lot easier than probably any footage that you import. Okay, so let's do some color grading now. I'm going to change my layout. I'm just going to move this in here, drag this out a little bit, and then drag a new window out and line it up with this. You might have to move both of these here. These need to be lined up, this vertical line here, and then I'm going to grab this corner and pull that up into this one. And then we'll change this to sequencer and preview so that we have this. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want this whole thing down here to be able to do my color grading. This is in case we need our settings in our video editing workspace. So let's just collapse that here for now. Okay, so now we are ready to color grade. Let's duplicate our footage twice, just straight up. And the first one is going to be our mask. So we're going to name this, make sure you're on your strip tab and name this snow mask. And for our snow mask, I'm going to come to our color and bring down the saturation all the way to 0. Okay, so I need to pause it here because I completely forgot to do something through this entire tutorial, and that is we need to come over here to our render properties tab all the way down to color management and change filmic to standard. This is going to highly change the colors and the way colors are displayed in your footage and your video sequence editor. And so it's going to very much affect your color grading. Now, I didn't do this through the entire tutorial. I didn't realize it till the very end. So I'll show you at the very end the difference between the filmic look and the standard look. All the same color grading principles still apply. Just remember that you need to do this first. It's going to change the look. Okay, back to the tutorial. I can also just click and type in 0 and then come over to our modifiers, add a curves, and then drag the top one all the way over here like this. It's really blown out, and then drag the bottom one really close to this. So you see this line on the grid here. It's creating this mask. Now, essentially what this is a color ramp or a levels tool. If you're familiar with Photoshop or GIMP, this just adjusts your levels. So if you want less snow, just bring the top and the bottom over here like this, and there you go, you have less snow. So we're going to bring this over here. This is all personal preference, so I think that something like this looks just fine. So we're going to keep it like that. We can always adjust it later, but this is actually going to be our mask. We are only going to show the snow where the white parts are, and then all the black parts are going to be our original footage. I'm going to go ahead and hide that now, and then this footage here, we're going to go back to our strip, name this snow footage, because this is going to be our color grading that we're going to use for the snow. Now we could just come over here to multiply and just crank that up and do it like that, which is a very easy way to do it. And then if we come to our modifiers, add strip modifier mask, we can come to our mask and then add our snow mask. And now you can see it just adds that whiteness, that blown out image over our original footage, which is this. If you shift and then right click, you can see your original footage. This is original footage. And then here's our blown out image. Using that mask, you can see anywhere there is black, it's actually transparent, which means it's showing through to the layer beneath it. So we have something that looks like that, but I'm actually gonna not use the strip multiply. I'm just gonna bring that back to 1 because what I want to do is have a little bit more control. So we're going to use another curves here, and I'm just going to crank this up here like this. And now I can have a lot more control over what that snow looks like. We can kind of click and add another point in here and bring that up if you're familiar with curves. So something like that, and bring this back down, something like that. Yeah, so I like that. We can adjust it later. So now the footage that is below it is just a little bit too dark, so we're going to adjust that as well. So let's go ahead and bring, now we can do a curves same way here and just click and drag, and we can, you know, have a lot of control over that like that. But we can also, instead of that, just do a color balance, and we can have control over the gamma and the gain. So this is kind of like your highlights and your shadows for different things. And then we can also mess with the colors behind it there. So kind of give it a different kind of tint for the highlights and the shadows. And then overall, here we can bring it overall up and down. And you notice, see, that doesn't affect the snow because the snow is the 2 layers above it. So it's a couple different options. I'm not really liking this too much here like this. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to our curves and then just bring this up a little bit here. Depending on where you put that point, will give you a different look. You can also add as many points on here as you want to create different kinds of effects. So I kind of like that there. I'm going to hide our snow footage for now and then come back here and then adjust this a little bit more here so that we can kind of get the look that we want here first, maybe. And we can always come over and Alt-H's to unhide, see what that looks like. And what I'm going to try to do is just make some of these colors pop out. So I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to come up here to our color balance, and then in our gamma, just going to bring this down, yeah, a little bit here to the reds, and maybe in between the reds and the yellows. I just want to make that a little bit more red kind of pop out here. And maybe some down here. Not too much down here, I guess. Maybe more towards the yellow, yeah, something like that. And then I'm going to come up to strip modifier, add a hue correct, and then with the reds, and then the S is for saturation. So we're going to bring the reds and the yellows and their saturation up. Yeah, like that. I like that. We can leave the other stuff there. Yeah, I like how that is looking here. Okay, so let's unhide our snow by Alt H. And so that is what we see over the top of that. Now I do notice that the snow is having a yellow tint here. So to correct that, what you can do is come to your white balance on your snow footage and then take that down a little bit to the yellow to get rid of that yellow. And what that's going to do, you might want to look at the whole thing. See, that's actually making it like this really frosty blue. That's a little bit too much. So I just want to look and see. We just want something subtle. Yeah, something like that. So that is, and maybe that is even still too much. Now we have that yellow that we just added to our footage here, so we can actually, with our snow enabled, modify this a little bit more so it's not quite as prominent, but still something that pops out. Yeah, so something like that. That's not too bad. And you can change, this is all personal preference, so you can change this kind of however you want. I just like to have the contrast of these red leaves coming out under that snow, makes a nice realistic touch to it there. Okay, so let's see what we have kind of over here. Yeah, that's not too bad. Another thing I'm going to do with our footage here is you can see this has like kind of a bluish purplish tint. That's actually part of this footage. If we hide that, you can see that's a little purple here. So what I'm going to do is just bring down the purples. Well, actually, I'm going to bring this over to red, up to the red to pop that red out a little bit more maybe. We'll have to look at that with the snow, but just take down those purples like that. And now you can see that actually, ooh, I like that a lot better here and just everywhere. So this is what it looks like before and then after. And let's go back to, we can bring this down a little bit more here. That's before and then after. Yes, I like that. It just pops those colors out a little bit more, get those nice yellows and reds in there. Okay, let's look at the snow again. Alt H to unhide that. And this is what we have so far. And that might be a little bit too red, of course. There you can kind of go back and forth with the snow. So we can, play with the red saturation there. And that doesn't look too bad. Yeah, do something like that. Perfect. All right. That looks good enough, I think, at least for the footage. The snow footage, you can play with the values here for like the background, like the top. You can see if I pull that in, it's kind of blown out a little bit more, especially at the top, like that. So the further out I put that, you can see it kind of further fades into the distance there and it's less blown out. But if I go too far, then it starts to look really fake, down here. So you just gotta find a happy medium here, something like that. And of course you can mess with both of these here. Ooh, I kind of like that. And another thing you can do is come to the strip tab and then change the opacity. If we bring that down, it has a little bit less of an effect. And you can see if I bring it all the way down and then all the way back up. So if I do like a 0.8 there, it's not as harsh as far as being blown out. So it's not as apparent that this is just a visual effects gimmick. So yeah, just kind of screw up through there, kind of look at it all over here. Let's see what that looks like down there. And that still looks a little bit too blue there. We can actually do the same thing here on this snow footage. Just add a hue correct and then bring those blues down just a little bit. And the purples. We don't want to bring them down all the way, just a little bit. Yeah, so you can see that before and after, we're just kind of getting rid of that blue on that log there, and then kind of maybe some around there as well, like that. Yeah, I like that. So that looks pretty good. Maybe bring this down a little bit. And of course, you can spend quite a bit of time tweaking this yourself, but this looks good enough. I think that looks like pretty good snow. So the next step is to track our footage so that the snow will fall, and not just as an overlay, but actually in 3D space. So let's come over to our video effects and motion tracking. Of course, don't forget to save. And then we can open up our footage that we had previously. And then all we have to do is click Detect Features, and then in this little drop down thing that comes up, we can just adjust these settings. Threshold, margin. Oh yeah, that's the margin. We want to bring that margin up a lot because we don't want it to go to the edges of the footage. Distance, we can mess with that. And this is just, we're just testing out things, just messing around. So let's do 70 here. Okay, there we go. With all of them selected, press Control T to track. And I did not track apparently on the first frame, which you probably should want to track on the first frame. Okay, so yeah, I did not track that first frame, or to the first frame, so I'm going to come to frame 55, and then we're going to track backwards with this button, or we can do Control Shift T and track backwards. Okay, so now you can look at your curves down here. If we bring this up just a little bit. You can see they all kind of follow the same kind of path, except for you see these outliers. Just select those. If you see a spike like that, just X to delete, and it will delete that tracking marker. We can probably delete some of these also over here, like this one is a little bit off. Delete that. Just want a nice smooth, everything kind of following the same kind of path there. That's the first step, and then the second step is to come over to our solve, click keyframe. You can also click tripod for this because I'm not actually moving in space, I'm just panning around, but I'm just going to leave that as keyframe. And then for refine, I'm going to choose focal length K1 and K2, and then select everything, make sure I'm on frame 1, solve camera motion, and then we wait. You can see that actually is being solved down here. Okay, so we actually got a pretty good solve error. If you get more than one, you probably should adjust it. And if you look at my object tracking tutorial for my zombie teeth, I give you some ways that you can find tracking markers that you can delete. But for just a real quick cleanup, you can come over here to cleanup, deselect everything, say clean tracks, and then in the drop down, you can do a reprojection error, just start sliding this up. And you want to slide this up until the one or two or three that are the highest reprojection error here. Now, of course, this is still under 1, so this is still pretty good. But if you have like a crazy amount, like 30 reprojection error, then you just crank this all the way up to like 30, or till where you only see 1 or 2 of these that are highlighted. And then once they're highlighted, just delete them. Then select everything again and solve the camera motion again, because that is going to calculate everything without the highest solve error tracks. Okay, but I don't need to do that. I've got a really good solve error. And even if I didn't, we're just looking for the motion from left to right to back to left again. And it doesn't have to, in this case, match completely with our footage. It just has to give a basic camera motion, which is what we have. So now let's add our snow. So let's come to our layout view and delete the default cube. I'm going to select our camera, Alt R, Alt G, R, X, 90. And then we're going to bring that up on the Z a little bit and then bring that back on the Y. That's our camera here. And then let's go ahead and add a constraint and a camera solver. And then to see those motion tracking markers, we just click motion tracking. And there we go. So that is our scene, the way it's tracked. And you can see if we press play, let's bring this up here. It's playing through our frame range, and you can see the camera is moving the way I was moving it in 3D space, which is nice. If I press 0, I can go into the camera, and you can see that this is what we see. If I come to my camera, go to background images, add an image, and then choose our footage, which is not there, so we actually have to open it up again. Image sequence, footage, there we go. Crank that alpha all the way up, and you can see our tracking markers are stuck to the ground and where we had our tracks placed. All right, that's pretty cool. So now let's add in the snow. So let's create the snowflake first. I'm going to hide my camera and my light right now because I don't need them. And then Shift A to add in a circle. And then down here, if you don't see this, come up here to view and then adjust last operation. You can see this. Change the fill type to Ingon so we have something in there. We'll collapse that. Go in the top mode. Now, if you do this, you should have an automatic UV map that's created for you. So if we go over to the UV editing, you can see this is your UV map. If for some reason this doesn't work for you, it doesn't have it automatically, then you can come to UV maps, press the plus to create a new one, go into top mode here, top orthographic, which is number 7 on the numpad. And then from where you are, you can press U. Let's just do this here just for demonstration purposes. U and then project from view. Now that's not scaled all the way up, so you can also just do project from view bounds, and then that will give you your correct UV map, hopefully. But I'm just going to use the original one here. So I'm just going to delete this one and we'll use the original one. Now, what I'm about to show you is, in my opinion, the best way to create a snowflake. No modeling required, only painting, and it's awesome. So first we need to add in a material. So come over to our materials tab, make sure your circle is selected, add a new material. I'm going to click the principal shader X to delete. We're going to add in instead a shader emission. Going to hook that up here. Then I'm going to also add in a shader mix shader and a shader transparent. And then we're going to slide this here, hook the emission into the bottom and the transparent into the top. Now I'm going to create a new image, add in a texture, image texture. Click new. I'm going to title this Snowfall Mask. We're going to make this something really small like 64 by 64 because that doesn't need to be big at all. I'm going to uncheck alpha because this is just going to be a black and white mask. Then click OK. Hook up the color to the factor, and now you see the circle turn black. Let's go into top mode here as well. But we don't want this to be black. We want it to be invisible. So come over to the Materials tab, and under Settings, blend mode, change that to alpha blend. Now we are ready to paint. So let's go to our texture paint and make sure our snowfall mask is selected over here in our tool. Press 7 to go in the top mode again. Now in texture paint workspace, I'm still in the solid shaded mode. If I go into material preview, you can see that it's completely invisible, which is what we want. And if I scroll down over here, if I paint with white, you can see that paints on our image here, just like that. You can see. And then if I paint with black, all I have to do is press X to switch that to black. So X switches that. And I think I can hit Control also. If I hit Control, that'll temporarily paint it black. But I can also just switch it by pressing that. So this is what we're going to use to paint in our snowflake shape. So I make sure everything is black over here. I can also paint on this side here on the image. I'm going to go back into solid shade mode so I can see the boundaries of this. And then I'm just going to start painting in a white color here. So actually, before I do that, I'm going to undo that. I'm going to come up here to my fall off and change this to a sharp fall off, something like that. And then to see what that's doing, I can come over to my cursor, fall off opacity, change that all the way up to 100%, click that button there. F to change the size of your brush, and you can see that the darker areas is where it's going to start painting in there, and you can kind of see what that's doing. Just so that we have a more faded look, which of course is personal preference. So yeah, so I'm just going to start painting something resembling a snowflake. Too much there, so I'm just going to go to black and just erase some of that there. Okay, so you have a basic snowflake shape here, and if you wanted to, you could just use something like that. But I'm going to do a little bit more here. I'm going to come in here and just going to erase this here like that. And I'm going to add something like this. And you could put any sort of pattern in there that you want, and you could also create multiple. So we could create 3 or 4 circles with different painted textures. That way they're not all the same exact pattern. But that is way too detailed for what we are going to use it for and what we're even going to see on the screen. So this is good for now. Now make sure we save this. We don't want to lose this information. So save, and I'm going to create a new folder and name it materials. On here, snowfall mask is okay. I'm going to change this to a JPEG because there's no alpha, and I'll leave it just like that. Save image. And now we're ready to add the snowfall with a particle system. So we can come here and look to see what we have. Haha, that's pretty cool. But what we want to do is rotate this a bit here. So R on the X, 90, and then I'm just going to move it on the X. No, I don't want to delete it. I want to move it on the X over here. Just kind of move it out of the way for now. And let's title this Snowflake. Okay, so now we need to add in a particle system. So Shift A, add in a plane. I'm going to scale that 10 times, bring that up on the Z here, just like that. And then if you come over here to face orientation, you can see that the blue is the front face and the red is the back face, which is on the bottom. But we want the blue to be facing downwards, so just rotate it on the X 180 degrees, and now we have that facing down. Okay, with the plane still selected, go to our particle tab, add in a particle system, and then before we change anything, we can go ahead and press play, and you can see at frame 1 it starts and the particles start falling. And you can see they fall until about frame 250 if we scroll in here. See, about frame 250, they're gone. But you can see as it starts going, they continue to spawn until frame 200, where they stop spawning. They're still falling, but they stop spawning from the plane at frame 200 because we have the end of the particle system at 200. But we want this to be the same as our end frame, so I'm going to copy our end frame and paste it in here. And any change you make, everything will disappear and you'll have to reset it. So go back to frame 1 and press play. And then now it shouldn't stop at 200. It should keep going. So we'll see what happens. And yes, that's what happens. Okay, but now they are just rendering as these little halos. It's not using our snowflake, so that's what we need to point it to. So come down to render, and then where it says render as, choose object, and then our object, we want to choose our snowflake. And you can see that it chooses our snowflake, but it's still not rotated. It's still flat, pointing upwards. So all we have to do is click object rotation, and now you can see it's facing forward, but it's too small, so let's crank up that scale, and now you can see, haha, look at our beautiful snowflakes. But from here, we have to fit it to our footage. So if we come in here to our footage, enable the camera, and you can see we have some tweaking left to do. So what I'm going to do is just go through and show you the settings that I came up with that work the best for me. You will probably have to play around with this yourself, but here is what I've used. So go to fields, under gravity, I'm going to use 0.1, and that will make those snowflakes fall slower. But I need to adjust my plane a little bit here. It's too high, maybe, and probably a little bit too small. So I'm going to adjust this, just scale this up. So it's over a little bit more of those tracking points. I don't necessarily need to cover all of the points, but just something that looks good. Let's go into top mode, and I'm going to make sure I'm overlapping the camera a little bit here. Not too much, but you can see the camera is right there. Just going to kind of overlap it just like that, and maybe scale this down a little bit first and then overlap, because again, I don't want it too big there. See what that looks like. All right, that's not too bad. It's kind of peeking out here in the corner of that, but I think that's good enough. we can get rid of that corner in just a little bit. Okay, but now I'm just going to go down the list of my settings. So for the first one, frame start, it's starting at 1, and you can see that they are spawning at frame 1, but I don't want that. I want frame 1 to already have snow falling. In order to do this, let's increase the lifetime here to 1000, and then just see when they reach the bottom of our camera viewport, which is about 124, maybe even a little bit less than that. Yeah, about 107. We'll go to 110. So 110, so all we have to do for our frame start is negative 110 and go back to frame 1. And you can see at frame 1, we already have snow. Now, if this doesn't refresh enough for you, you can always refresh the plane by hiding it and then unhiding it again. And that should do that for you. All right, so those are good. Let's see what's next. Velocity is what's next. I'm going to set the randomize to 1.5 and the object velocity to 0.3. I'm going to set the object scale to something like 1.75. Whoa, not 1.75, 0.175 is what I meant. And we can scale the randomness to 1. And then maybe I'll make this 0.2 instead. Yeah, that'd be fine. So we have something that looks like this. All right, and go back to the beginning and then refresh the plane. And then, oh yeah, that's looking pretty nice. I like that. Oh, but I forgot rotation. So let's add in some rotation and go back to the beginning and refresh. There we go. Now we have nice rotating snowflakes. Oh, and one thing I did forget, there's not enough of them yet. So I'm going to change the number of them from 1,000 to 5,000 and come back to the beginning. Ah, yeah, there we go. Just like that. And we've got snow. And I might even slow this down a bit. That might look actually a little bit too fast for the snow. It all depends on how fast you want that snow to fall. Let's just change this to 0.08 or even slow it down a little bit more. Okay, so I've got that all to 0. Maybe we can keep this at 0.1. Maybe the object velocity is what I'm going to change. So I'm going to bring that object velocity back down to 0. Okay, so I don't know why the snow still falls, bringing the gravity all the way to 0, but I think 0.005 looks pretty good here. But if you have your gravity all the way down to 0 and you still want it to be slower, what you can do is come to the physics, make sure you're on Newtonian physics under forces, then you can click and drag this drag up, and that will slow that down. It'll have more of air drag. And if I crank that all the way up to 1, you can see it slows that down even more. You probably damp it as well. Let's see if that does. Yeah, so messing with the damp and the drag will slow your particle system down even more since the gravity apparently isn't doing the trick. So for the snowfall and falling in random directions, I used to use the velocity randomize here, but I turned that off all the way down to 0, and then instead I'm using the Brownian. I put the Brownian up to 1, and that seems to work just fine. Let's go back to the beginning here. Okay, yeah, so I like that. So the snow falling like that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to return my rotation back on. And now we have random rotation as well as random turbulence there. I also need to change my start frame, see what frame it starts, to fall all the way past our bottom camera view here. And that is about frame 122, or maybe we just go to 120, that'll be fine. Now that's going to be an additional 120 from this one because it's already starting at negative 110. So I'm going to click in here, do minus 120, 230, and come back to the beginning. And yes, so that is happening there. I don't like that rotation though. So I'm going to bring up that randomized phase to, we'll just do 0.85. There we go. Something like that. Awesome. Okay, I think I like that. That's good enough for now, for our purposes at least. let's see what it looks like when we render it. So let's go to our rendering tab and then press F12 to render. And if you still just see your snowflake here, come up here to render result. And we still see our video sequence editor because in our output tab under post processing, we still have sequencer checked. I'm going to uncheck both sequencer and compositor and then F12 again. And this is what we see. Okay, so we've got to make a couple changes here. First, we need transparency. So come up here to our render properties again, down under film, check transparent, and then F12. And now we have transparency. And I also think if we can, we might be able to see that emitter. So if we come back over to our layout, let's go to a frame where that is in there. And maybe we don't. See, but just barely, maybe right here. You can see right there that corner is peeking through the camera view. So if we go back to rendering and if I F12, you can see that corner right there. So to fix this, all we have to do in our layout mode, physics properties, let's find it here under render, uncheck show emitter. And now if we come back to our rendering and render that, we don't see anything. That's because we have to run our simulation again. All the way, okay, see, and this is even a bigger corner here. So on 146, let's go back to rendering, F12. You can see it does not render our plane, which is what we want. Okay, but the last thing we need before we start rendering is motion blur. This looks way too crisp and clean, and it's going to look hokey if we combine it like this with our footage. But now we can check motion blur here, but I have not found out how to do motion blur in Eevee. I know that there are some hacks that I've watched a couple of videos, but I haven't researched that enough and tested it out enough. So instead, we're just going to come and change this to cycles and then check motion blur for cycles. Make sure also under film we still have transparent. And then motion blur and F12. And now you can see, well, we have some motion blur going on here. I'm going to just crank this up here to 1. Let's see what that looks like. And that looks a lot better, I think. But they're not falling fast enough to have fast enough motion blur, so we can also tweak that, and I think I'm going to. But before I do that, you can see it renders quite slowly. That's because our render is at 128 samples. We really don't need this. I can just bring these both down to something really small like 16, and then try that here, and that renders a lot faster. But there's not enough motion blur on this, so I am going to tweak this. Come back over here. Let's go make this gravity. Let's go back to 0.1. I'm just going to see what that looks like because that's what I had it originally. And that doesn't look too bad. Maybe 0.05. Let's see what we have there. I want one with, yeah, a snowflake right up against the camera there. So let's go here, F12. Yeah, that's not too bad. I like that because we can still adjust this a little bit more in the video sequence editor, but I'm just going to check a couple of these frames. All right, I think we're ready to render out in this into an image sequence. So let's come to our output and make sure we have all the settings that we want. I don't need to change any of this. Just need to change the output. So instead of a footage folder, I'm going to make a snowfall folder and then either forward or backslash, that doesn't matter. I'm going to do snowfall underscore again, enter, uncheck overwrite, and then change JPEG to PNG because we actually do want that alpha. So make sure RGBA is checked and then we want to save it. And now we are ready to render this into an image sequence. So Control F12. And you can see this very first frame does something really funky, and I don't know why it does that. And it also goes really ridiculously slow, even though we have our sampling at 16. But once we hit frame 2, it will start to go a lot more smoothly. So then we got, and it doesn't. And this is because I forgot one thing. Let's stop this here. In order to get a smooth render, we have to bake out our particle simulation. So go back to layout and then let's go to cache, and then let's go to the beginning, and we'll go ahead and refresh this and then click bake. So now it's baked in the cache you can see down here, and that's what this red bar down here is. That's the visualization of the cache being stored. So now we have that. Let's go back to render, and then now, since we've already started rendering some of these, I'm going to check overwrite because I want to overwrite all of the previous ones, and then Control F12. And you can still see the first frame does this funky little thing, but hopefully once we reach the frame 2, it'll start to render out normally. All right, so there we go. We hit frame 2, and now it renders really fast normally. So to deal with this a little better, let's stop this here again. I'm going to change my start frame to 2 and then my end frame to 396. Now there may be a different way to work around that first frame being all garbled, but I don't know what it is. So I found this works for me. Of course, we're gonna have to refresh and then I'll delete that bake, refresh, and then bake again, and come back to rendering, make sure override is checked, save it, and Control F12. Now, starting at frame 2, we're going to have the same amount of frames because we just bumped the start and the end frames over 1. So they'll still line up with our footage, but that just gets rid of that really crappy frame. Okay, so after we're all done rendering this image sequence out, we will import it into our video editor and lay it over our footage. Okay, so we are done rendering. Let's go back over to our video editing and add in an image sequence. Go to our snowfall and add our strip. Bring that to the top. And this is what we have. Ta-da! Now I do want to adjust this a little bit more, but you can see that already that looks pretty stinking sweet, even though it's going really slow, because it's still caching in here, down here. So let's with just let that cache in just a little bit more here, and let's just see what it looks like from here. So I'm going to go back to the beginning and then just play that. Oh yeah, look at that. That looks fantabulous. I love it. Okay, but I do want to change the color of those snowflakes just a little bit, and I'm going to try to find a good place to where I can actually see those. Some over here on the tree, and then, you know, maybe some where it's really close to the camera here. What I'm going to do is come over to strip and change alpha over to replace, just so we can see these and isolate them a little bit more so you can see what's happening. Come to modifiers and add in a color balance, and then just put these up to a little bit more of a bluish tint here, something like that. Now that may be too much here, but that's kind of what I'm going to do so that it matches, because remember we had a little bit bluer of a tint in our snow footage. So not too much here, but something that matches that just a little bit more so it's not like a grayish. You can kind of see the difference there. So let's see what that looks like. Let's see if we put that back to alpha over. Oh yeah, that looks a lot better. So it matches the footage a lot better, I think. And of course that could be a little bit too blue. I don't know. We can always, of course, you know, modify that. And yeah, actually I think that doesn't look too shabby. That looks pretty good. We can also, if we wanted to, come to our strip, and then if we wanted it to be a little bit brighter, we can actually just multiply that here like that. You can see that's really bright there. We probably don't want to do it that much. I don't know if I want to do it at all. I'll try 1.2. And then you can see that like that. But I don't even know. I don't know if that's even the best. I actually think that just having it at the regular 1 does the trick. Now, if it's too bright, you can actually pull that down, or you can even change the opacity. So we can bring that opacity down, and then making those a little bit more see-through, so it kind of blends into the background a little bit more. See, that actually looks pretty cool. Doesn't look too bad either. So just have to play with it. It all depends on your footage and your tastes, what you think of it. But I think that everything by default looks pretty good, along with the modifier with the changing that color to blue a little bit. Okay, so all we have to do is render this out now into a movie, and that is very similar to our image sequence. I'm gonna go ahead and save this, and let's go to our rendering tab here. And if I press F12, I can just render just the first screen, and you can already see this is still rendering if we go to post-processing, this is just the 3D view. So we want to actually check sequencer, press F12 again to make sure we're rendering the sequencer. Okay, and I can change my frame here. I like to just check different frames just to make sure that all these frames that are randomly selected are rendering just fine. So that looks pretty good, but now we are going to actually change our output. So instead of image sequence, we're going to make a renders folder. Now you can also click this folder icon and go select a folder, create a folder, all that stuff from here. I just find this to be a lot easier. So renders and then / to make renders that folder. And then just inside a renders folder, I'm just going to name this final snow footage or whatever you want. Underscore. I'm going to uncheck overwrite, although I don't think it matters for video footage, which we are going to change the file format to FFmpeg. And then under encoding, make sure RGB is selected unless you want black and white, but I want RGB for color. Container, MP4, and then I want all the default settings here. Now for the audio, I actually do want audio. So I'm going to change that to MP3, but our audio is currently muted. So I'm going to come back to video editing, select our audio, and then Alt H to unhide that or unmute that and play that just to make sure that that plays. Okay, yep, so that's playing all right. So go back over to rendering, and then everything looks pretty good here. So this is again going to be up to you and your personal preferences, but I'm ready to render. So I'm going to save it and then Control F12, and then that's going to render out all of our footage along with our color corrections, our snowfall, overlay, and our sound. Okay, so I want to show you a couple of changes I did. Like I said at the beginning, I forgot to change my color management from Filmic to standard, and you can see what the difference is if I change this back to Filmic. You can see it has a very different look. I also added this adjustment layer, and I'll show you that in a second. But this is kind of what it looked like. Just a lot less contrast, and just a different look to it. So when I did change that back to standard, you can see, look how different that looks. And I like the standard look. Of course, from my understanding, the Filmic is only supposed to be used for 3D scenes to make them look more realistic. But if you're actually using video footage that you've recorded, you want to use standard. So that's something that I did. I also changed my snowfall here. So I actually re-rendered the snow to make it look a little bit better here. And of course, with that, I've color graded it just to make it a little bit look a little bit more blue, just matching the color tones. And you can see kind of up here these snowflakes. If I disable this, you can see the difference there. This looks a little too hokey, a little too obvious, like it's an overlay, but then when you match the colors, it looks pretty good. Brought down the brightness too. You can bring up or down the brightness there. I also changed the way the snow falls. So let me go over my settings here again. If I just delete my bake so you can see this a little bit better. For the number, I have 5,000, frame start -130, end frame 395, lifetime 1,000. It didn't really change a lot there. But then we come down here. I actually did end up using the randomize for the velocity here to 0.5 instead of the Brownian. So I got rid of the Brownian and just used the velocity. The rotation I have 0.4. The scale, I bumped that down because I thought the snowflakes were a little bit too big, so I bumped that down to 0.1. And then I bumped the gravity to 0.05. I just don't want stuff falling too quickly. Or I guess I could also come up here and maybe adjust the drag and the damp to just let them fall a little bit slower, but the slower they fall, the more you can see the holes in the snowflakes, which again kind of looks hokey. It kind of looks like a little honeycomb thing that's falling from the sky. And then another thing I did was adjust the camera, the depth of field. So I put depth of field check that on. And then in my viewport display, I enabled my limits so I could see this little crosshair thing. And you can see that is my depth of field. That's where the focus is going to be. That's 6.9, or I just try to do it like right in front before it hits that tree, basically. So you can something like this. I mean, maybe 7 would be good. But that way, the snow, kind of outside of the depth of field is going to be more out of focus. And I think that helped with the snowfall and not being so crisp honeycomb-like there. But with enough motion blur, then it doesn't really matter a whole lot. So with that motion blur, let's go to, actually, we need to. You can see enough to know that it's like a fluffy snowflake there. But I could even change the size of these to be a little bit smaller, or I could paint out some of those holes inside there, maybe to make it look less fluffy. But if you want fluffy snowflakes, that's how you do it. Then the last thing I did was put an adjustment layer. Now an adjustment layer, if I unhide this, you can see what that does. So that's hidden, and I just put a really basic curve modifier and just brought that up just a little bit. You can see that just makes it a little bit brighter in the scene there. What an adjustment layer does is affects everything that's beneath it. So that way I don't have to go to each one of these and adjust the brightness individually. I can just adjust it here. And then I rendered it out into a video, and it looks something like this. But this is just a quick and easy way to add snow if you want to add snow to your footage. So I hope you really enjoyed it, and I hope everyone has a Merry Christmas. And if you don't have a white Christmas, now you can make one.